Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford here with Gene Henley for another episode of the show. Gene, it's our first postseason show of ever, actually, because this rebranding didn't happen until after the Vols were eliminated from March Madness last year. So this is actually our first ever postseason episode. So welcome in, guys. Hope you guys enjoy this day.
Exciting, man.
Yeah, this is exciting time. March is my favorite time of year, so I'm very pumped about this. If you're new here, thank you all for tuning in and making this your first episode. You can find our podcast everywhere you get podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, you name it, we're there. We're on YouTube as well. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. And subscribe to the channel while you're here. Give this video a like. We would appreciate it a ton. All right, Gene, we are done with the regular season. Tennessee tried to go out with tried to give away the last game to Arkansas, but we're able to hold on, and a win's a win. Take it however you get it, even if you go up by 20 early on in that game with an offensive explosion. And it ends up being I want to say it never ended up being a tie game, but Arkansas made it uncomfortably close, like a 1 or 2 point game late in the second half. And Tennessee was able to just very, 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 very tightly just cling to that lead and was able to win that one 78-74. You had that game. Tennessee comes out on fire from three in that game. They could not miss. They were just splashing threes all over the place. You had Vescovy hitting threes, Chandler hitting threes, Josiah hitting threes. That's the guy I think hit a three in that stretch. But in that game, Vescovy finished the game 3 of 4 from three. Chandler was 5 of 6. He was 5 of 5 at one point. I think I don't remember when he missed it, but he missed one, but he was 5 of 5 at one point from three. Josiah was 2 of 3. And then Ziegler was 2 of 5 from three. Those were the only guys that shot threes. But Tennessee in the first half, 9 of 12 from three, 14 of 28 overall from the floor. So 50% from the floor, 75% from three. And Tennessee went into halftime with a 50 piece on Arkansas, 50-29. And then the roles basically reversed. Arkansas outscored Tennessee 45-28 in second half, and Tennessee ends up winning by 4. But again, the complete and total collapse was avoided. Jalen Williams didn't really get any charge calls, which was a big deal that I talked about in the preview video I did, where the foul differential was a massive difference for Arkansas on the road versus at home this year. And Tennessee was able to escape a potentially really just upsetting loss for Vol fans and finish the year undefeated at home. It was the second time in the Rick Barnes era, Gene, that Tennessee has finished the year undefeated at home. It's a little harder than you might expect to finish undefeated at home, but especially this year for Tennessee, when you look at some of the teams they played at home, when you look at Arizona, you look at Arkansas, you look at Kentucky, you played at home, LSU, you played at home, which back when they were, not quite the mess they are now necessarily, but you played some really tough teams at home this year and were able to come out unscathed and no losses, period. It wasn't all just against weak competition and, non-conference cupcakes. It was against some pretty tough teams there too. So kind of just a wrap up of that game. And I guess of the regular season in general, Tennessee 23-7, 14-4 in SEC. They finished with the second seed in the SEC tournament. Of course, a lot of you already know this. And as we're recording this, Gene, it is on Thursday afternoon. So it's before South Carolina and Mississippi State tip off. So we don't know who Tennessee will be playing in the SEC tournament quarterfinals just yet on Friday, but it'll be one of those two teams. Before we get into that, I will go ahead and say I feel pretty good about Tennessee beating either one of those teams. But Gene, I want to know your thoughts on the Arkansas game and just kind of Tennessee's regular season as a whole, because we predicted like a 21-10, 21-10, 22-9 type season. Obviously the Memphis game got canceled, so that cut down the 31 games to 30 total. But we were fairly spot on what we thought. And in fact, Tennessee honestly was a little better than I thought they'd be, because I think they would have beaten Memphis and that would have given them a 24-7 record. They actually, kind of not only met my expectations, but kind of exceeded them for the regular season. When you look at it as a whole, especially the teams they played and who they beat and where they played them and stuff, all 7 of their losses were quad 1 losses, and they didn't have a single bad loss to any teams. And they played a lot of really good teams. They have one of the top 15 strength of schedules in the country. And it shows when you look at some of the bracketology stuff, when you have Villanova, Texas Tech, Auburn, Kentucky, all up there in like the 2 seed area and then high 3 seed area. And those are teams that all Tennessee played them this year. So again, I think Tennessee in the regular season, I think, exceeded my expectations for them this year. And they've gotten better as the season went along, which we talked about at the beginning of the year. We thought would happen. It happened maybe in a little different way than I expected, but they got better. And I think they're playing a lot better basketball overall now than they were a month and a half ago. And you want to be doing that. We talked about last time. You want to be doing that this time. You want to be peaking and playing your best basketball when you're in March.
Before I get started, is Memphis back? I don't know. I don't really know what I don't know what we're supposed to do with Memphis.
I meant to say at the top of the show, congratulations to the UTC Mocs, the team you cover, because you had a wild ride there in the SoCon tournament championship there with that game winner. That was an incredible game.
Amazing game. But yeah, like the Memphis thing is weird. I don't know. Like I think Tennessee would have trounced about 25 if they had played that day. We could all speculate as to what would happen now, but yeah, so if you look back on this season, like you're talking about a Tennessee team that has kind of found its stride, a team that's figured a bunch of stuff out as to how they want to play. I think when people look back on this season 5 years from now, the decision to use John Fulkerson as a role player this season, I think, is a big part, a big reason for their success, because you could have kept forcing them out there, playing them 30 to 35 minutes every night. And look, man, I remember you and I sat here in November, in November, and when we were finishing a podcast, we were talking, and I just said, this team has to get production from Brandon Henley Hatfield. It doesn't always have to look great, but you have to give that kid minutes, because as a kid like that gets minutes, you start to figure things out. Same thing with Adu. Always want to say it wrong. Same thing with Adu. Like when he's healthy, like they needed to get him minutes. And we didn't talk about that because he was, obviously not healthy early on. He has the big block performance. It was against Kentucky, I believe. Ends up having some really good contributions to the end of the season. But I think to get the production out of those guys, you had to have a guy who's so selfless, like in John Fulkerson, who was willing to say, I've had an amazing career, but for us to take this next step, I need to take a step back as to who I am, which has allowed some other players to maybe take steps forward. I mean, people are seeing a completely different Josiah Jordan James now. The point guard position is certainly a strength. And you kind of believe that early on, but there's no drop off from 1 to 2. Vescovi is supplanted himself as one of the best shooters in college basketball. You're getting a lot of your production from those guys that I just named. Now, going forward, I mean, like, what can you expect going forward? And we can talk about the Arkansas game. I think it's a game where you just basically say, look, man, we struggled. We struggled in the second half. And look, the book is out on Tennessee. If you take away their 3-point shooting, they're gonna. I mean, you can beat them. That's understand that if you just kind of look at the second half of that game, they took away the threes, and when you took away the threes, I'm looking at a team that shot 40% from the field, only got to take 6 threes. And when you take away the 3-point attempts, now you have to figure out ways to get offense. It took 12 threes in the first half of that game out of 28 shots. Because again, it's not like they shot a bad percentage in the second half. They were 3 for 6 from 3. Mm-hmm. But when you take away those threes in the second half, now you have to generate offense from your interior game or inside the 3-point line. And they're not always great at that. But the only thing I'll say is it stinks that that Arkansas came back. That's a really good team you're playing, and you beat them. You didn't expect to be up 21 points at the half. So, okay, the game that it turned out to be was the game you were expecting all along, a back and forth affair where both teams would have opportunities. The fact, defensively, you won that game because you held them without they didn't hit a shot in the last 3 minutes of the game.
Yep.
So that, maybe if they hit a couple shots, I don't know. We'll see. But the way that I can wrap this thing up was, I think ultimately they had a little bit better of a season than I think either one of us thought that they would have. And there's a lot of reason for optimism going forward. Now, can they pull 3 wins in 3 days in Tampa? It still bothers me. Can they pull 3 wins in 3 days in Tampa? That's going to be the tough thing, because they're going to play an easy winnable game, a winnable game against Mississippi State or South Carolina. Then you get Kentucky, and this is the rubber match. That's usually how these games go, where Kentucky blows them out in Lexington. Tennessee comes back, is pissed off, so they beat them down in Knoxville, and then you get the great rubber game in usually Nashville, but this year it's in Tampa, and then we'll see what happens in the final. But you put yourself in a position to win this thing. You've given yourself a great draw against winnable foes in that quarterfinal game, and we'll see what happens Saturday and Sunday.
We talked about off air. I don't remember if we mentioned it on the podcast a couple weeks ago or not, but about kind of the similarities between this year and that 2018-19 season from the way the SEC shook out. And I said it on Twitter too. I was like, man, if Tennessee ends up playing Mississippi State again in their first game, and then plays Kentucky again in the semis, like it just feels, and with Auburn being the top seed again, it just feels a lot like that 18-19 season with how it played out with, and this time though, the fourth seed or the fourth team between Auburn, Tennessee and Kentucky isn't LSU, it's Arkansas. But there's just so much that feels similar to that 18-19 year, because that same year, as you just mentioned, Tennessee got blown out in Lexington, and then Tennessee blew out Kentucky and Knoxville. So it just feels similar. I don't know that we'll get the same result where Tennessee wins the rubber match in the tournament, or that it'll be as epic of a game as that one was in 2019. But if it is, like if it's another close nail biter, type of game where it takes the last second shot to win, that'll be fun. Unless it's Tennessee that loses, and that won't be fun for me, but it'll be fun for a lot of people. It'll be fun, entertaining game throughout. I'm willing to bet, because I agree with, like, I don't know how it won't be Tennessee, Kentucky, to be honest. Like I don't see Tennessee losing to South Carolina or Mississippi State, whoever they play, because you look at what they did against them in the regular season. Okay, this is a neutral site. Look what Tennessee did on the road against both those teams. They beat Mississippi State by 9, 72-63, and they absolutely just smacked the tar out of South Carolina 81-57 on the road in Columbia. And that was the game where Olivier Campbell went down with injury and has missed the rest of the year since then. And Tennessee didn't miss a beat and just pummeled the Gamecocks in that game. So they're able to do that in actual road environments, especially in Starkville when it was at the Hump there in Humphrey Coliseum. I fully expect Tennessee to handle their business against either one of those two teams. You're right, though. Like the next thing is going to be what they can do against Kentucky. Can Tennessee go and win 3 straight games in the SEC tournament? They have not done that in my lifetime. Well, I mean, they haven't done it to win a title in my lifetime, Gene. That they may have won 3 times in a row, like playing on the first weekend or something like that, or second weekend or whatever, and have made it to the championship game. But they've not won 3 straight games on a double bye to go win the the SEC championship. They haven't done that. They haven't won the SEC tournament since 1979, Gene. I wonder how many of our listeners were, not just alive, but like actually like watching and, big fans of Tennessee basketball back then, because I imagine it's not too many of them. I imagine most of our listeners are probably around both of our ages, like in their 30s, 40s, somewhere around there. Like, I don't imagine we have too many people, my parents' age or older watching or listening. But if you are have,
so welcome.
Yeah, welcome in. I'd be, like I said, I'd be curious to hear if you were alive and, not just like a little kid or whatever, like maybe we're a little kid, but I'd be interested to hear anybody who was listening to this, watching this, who got to witness the last time Tennessee won the SEC tournament, because college basketball was also just a very different sport back in 1979 from everything I've ever seen that talked about, like, just the way the NCAA tournament was even viewed back then was viewed differently than it is now. So, but anyway, all that to bring me to my point here is that even if they don't win the SEC tournament, I mean, that's, it is what it is. Tennessee hasn't done that in 40 years, so I'm not expecting them to do it. You can't lose badly to Kentucky. Tennessee, when I had Eric Haslam on, if you all haven't listened to the last episode yet, go check it out. He talked about Tennessee, Gene, basically no matter what, unless they lose to, the South Carolina or Mississippi State, then there's a chance they could fall. But even with that, he said there's a very good chance Tennessee is just locked in to the 3 seed for the NCAA tournament. And I can understand that. I think it's fine. And I think that makes sense. And I think that Tennessee as he said it too, just they kind of just feel like a 3 seed to me. Like it makes sense. I'm looking at some of the potential 14 seeds. If I'm looking here at bracket matrix at some of the teams that are ranked kind of in that 13 to 14 range, because I don't think 15 is kind of a different animal altogether. But looking at some of these teams, you have well, actually UTC is listed as a 13 on this one, Gene, but it's like a high 13, like almost a 12. So I don't know if I count them. But like a Toledo, New Mexico State, Princeton, Montana State, Longwood, Colgate. Those are the teams that don't think it'd be Colgate, because Tennessee and Colgate just played a couple years ago. That when Tennessee last made the Sweet 16. So I think you can probably take Colgate out of there, probably. But those are teams in the MAC, the WAC, an Ivy League school, a Big Sky school, and a Big South school. So I mean, I'd feel pretty okay for Tennessee's chances in those games against those. That's going to be one of their opponents. And I would be interested to see what the next matchup would be for Tennessee in that bracket, because again, we're getting to the point where we have some auto bids now, where teams are, UTC, for example, won the Southern, so they're automatically in there. We have a lot of these smaller conferences who have had their championship games, and we have all those locked in. Now we're getting to the big conference games where we're seeing some interesting upsets, and I'll talk about a couple of those in the SEC now, I guess, here in a second. But you're seeing some interesting upsets where like Boston College, for example, unfortunately beat Steve Forbes and Wake Forest. Then they went out and you had, I think, Pitt also. They almost ended up being Boston College today before we started recording. Just like they took Miami to overtime, and Miami had to win on a last second shot in overtime to beat Boston College. And Boston College was a really bad team this year. So I guess my point, Gene, is I think this team has shown that they can win in a variety of ways. And I think that's kind of what you have to do in March, because you're going to get matched up with somebody at some point who matches up really well against you. Like their strengths play into your weaknesses, unfortunately. And you're going to have to figure out, okay, how can we beat them? And Tennessee has shown that. They've won some really ugly defensive games. They've won some games where they've had to put up 80 points or so. And the Arkansas game was weird, because it was like a offensive showcase in the first half. And then it became, okay, we need to, and our defense was, their defense was playing really well in the first half. And then you're like, okay, can our offense do anything in the second half here with the way Arkansas's defense is playing? And can our defense get enough stops? And as you said, they didn't let them score a field goal in the last 3 minutes of the game. That was huge. And that was when defense, really stood up for Tennessee. I think they've shown that they can win in a variety of ways. And I think, again, the guard play has really improved as the season's gone on. And I think you can trust Chandler, Ziegler, and Vescovy especially to do just about anything you ask of them. And then also Josiah Jordan-James has been a godsend for Tennessee in SEC play. And by the way, more on those three guys that I mentioned besides Josiah in a second on some accolades for them. But I like this team. I saw I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago. I saw a prediction thing that was talking about like predictive SEC or predictive wins for teams in the NCAA tournament. And it gave Tennessee 2 predicted wins. Getting to the Sweet 16, I'd take it. Honestly, right now, I would take it. I think it'd be brutal to get that far, and then maybe it's a really close game and you just miss out on an Elite 8 run. But man, I would absolutely take a Sweet 16 for this team with the way, having an injury, with how young this team is overall. I would take that. It's really going to depend on how the bracket plays out for Tennessee. I've seen a lot of people kind of, I guess, mocking Tennessee to the same region as Duke. I don't want that, Gene. I think the idea of maybe being able to try to knock out Duke would be kind of interesting for me, because I would love that. But I also feel like Tennessee matches up with Duke. I don't know that Tennessee is going to get too many of the calls go their way, because it seems like the Coach K retirement party is going to maybe buy him some favors. I don't know. But anyway, I think that it's really going to depend on where Tennessee gets matched up in the bracket. Who's number one seed are they matched up with? Who's the 2 seed in that bracket? Because I have faith in this team to make a run. I don't know how deep of a run, but I think the top 4 teams in the SEC, Auburn, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas, are all capable of getting to their respective Elite 8s in whatever bracket they're in.
Right. So at the end of the day, I think what this will boil down to with Tennessee is, can they manufacture offense that's not looking for wide open threes? I was looking, I didn't realize, and we're talking about, Tennessee's defense. Tennessee didn't hit a shot in the last 6 minutes of the game.
Wow.
On Saturday. And so that allows teams, when you can't hit those threes, and obviously you built up so much excitement because you're 12, 16 or whatever you are at that point in the game, you're hitting threes, so you don't necessarily look for other shots. This has been an issue for Tennessee all season. When the threes are hitting, all of a sudden the threes aren't hitting. Can you manufacture ways to score points? And that's what it's going to boil down to, because if they're hitting consistently, if A, they're hitting consistently, or B, they are finding ways to generate offense otherwise, this team is Final Four good. And that's just reality. But if they can't figure out how to manufacture buckets when they're not hitting threes, and they don't get complacent hitting that, and they look for a Huntley Hatfield, or they look for a Fulkerson, or whoever the big is at the moment, Euros, whoever, who obviously has been a godsend for this program this season specifically. If those guys can get you some buckets, then you can still Final Four good. I'm not here to debate. I'm just telling you what I see. They're that good if those elements are there. But like I said, if they struggle, if they have one of these games, and look, I was at that Tennessee Colgate game, 3 years ago. If they're struggling to generate offense, and you get one of these lower seeds that all of a sudden maybe starts hitting some shots and has one of those just elite guards or elite whatever, and they can and that guy can build some momentum, hitting some shots. Now all of a sudden you've got a game. Now all of a sudden it's a lot closer than you would want a 3-14 or perhaps a 2-15 game to be. But yeah, that should have no deterrent on just how good this season's been. But I'm a person who just tries to look for what could hurt this team in the end. Do it with every team, any team I watch, any team I cover. What could hurt this team at the end of the day? And to me, the biggest issue is, can they find ways to hit buckets that aren't threes, because those can be taken away. Typically, a great shooting team hits 38% from three. A great shooting team. I imagine, obviously, there may be some team, a great 3-point shooter hits 40% or above, which means a great team typically hits probably 37, 38% on average. I don't know what the number one team in the country, what they shoot. Maybe it's some ridiculous number, but it feels to me like they're probably in the 37, 38 range.
I'm looking it up because I'm curious too.
I think Furman led the country in threes made and threes attempted. I don't know what their percentage was.
You're right. There is some ungodly one. South Dakota State, who went 30-4 this year, made 45% of their threes as a team. So, golly. But to your point, the top, basically around the top 15, Furman was number 16 in the country and 38%. So that's you're right. An elite 3-point shooting team, top 16 in the country is Furman, who made 38% of their threes.
Right. And so what teams will do to a team like Tennessee is, I don't know what Tennessee shoots. You've got the numbers there. Maybe 35, 36%, whatever it is.
On the year, about between 35, 36%. You're right.
Right. So what teams are going to do is they're going to take away Tennessee's attempts. It's okay if you hit your percentage. How many threes have they made this year?
Total or per game?
Per game.
Per game total this year, Tennessee averaged just under 9, so 8.8 threes per game made. So basically you're getting 27 points from three. So what teams are going to do is, how can we keep you from getting to 27 points just off those threes? So they'll take the number of attempts away. So if you only hit 5 or 6 threes in a game, can you manufacture what you can to get to 65 points of offense? That's what a lot of teams did. That's why a couple of those games were kind of rock fights at one point. Some games that people felt see Ole Miss or a game like that. Why is this game so tight? Why is it so close? We should be blowing this team out. They stink, blah, 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 blah. It's because teams like that are really strong defensively are taking away the thing that you do best, which is, finding and looking for those open threes. Because if you give Vescovy a 3 anywhere on the court, I'm running down court because I feel like it's going in. Mm-hmm.
So good teams are going to do that. They're going to prevent you from getting those attempts. They're going to prevent you from getting those shots. And so that's why I'm just adamant that, they're going to have to figure out ways to generate offense, because, like I say, good teams, but maybe not the 3-14 game or whatever, because we're both kind of assuming they're going to be a 3.
Yeah.
Maybe they win the tournament, they sneak up to a 2 at the end of the day, but I kind of lean probably, let's just say 3. That 3-14 team, they're not going to be athletic enough, quick enough to be able to stop everything that Tennessee does. So Ziegler or Chandler, Vescovy, Josiah, one of those guys will have the opportunity to kind of go off that game. But after that, you're playing tougher competition. You're playing tighter teams. You're playing teams that are probably Power 5 level schools. They have the ability to take some of those things away. So can you get the amount of offense that you need to win those games? Because if you do, I'll reiterate, Final Four good. If you don't, round up 32 bad.
And also kind of to your point, talking about the threes and how much of a chunk of the offense has been for Tennessee, looking at KenPom, Tennessee, the point distribution, the percentage of their total points, 35.7% of their total points this year came from threes, which was 69th in the country. So they were one of the top 70 schools when it came to the percentage of their points coming from threes. They were 290th in 2-pointers. Only 46.8% of Tennessee's points this year came from made 2-point field goals. The league or the country average is 50.8. So Tennessee had less than half, and the average basically is half of your points coming from twos. So yeah, really, that's a very good point. Now I was looking up stats while you were talking about it and kind of looking at the numbers for Tennessee and their 3-point attempts this year. They only had like 6 games this year where they attempted less than 20 3-pointers. They're 5-1 of those, 5-1 in those 6 games. But you look at some of those games, it was a 72-63 win against Mississippi State, the 52-51 loss to Texas, an 80-61 win against Missouri, a 78-74 win over Arkansas, 76-63 Kentucky, and then the 67-62 Auburn. So it wasn't like the only one that was a real, I guess, offensive showing was the first half against Arkansas. And then you can throw in the game against Missouri, I guess. And then for the opponent, for the caliber of opponent Kentucky was, but the those games were not the most aesthetically pleasing offensive games for Tennessee. So you make a good point. And again, Tennessee showed they can win those games, and because they were 5-1 in those games. But I think you're right. I think, taking away the threes, and it wasn't just those were 3-point attempts. You still look at what the number of threes Tennessee made in those games. Auburn, there were 6 of 16, so it wasn't great. Texas was 5 of 18, so again, awful. But the other games, they made 8 or more threes in the rest of those games, or they attempted 20 or less than 20 3-pointers. So I think you're right, though. Like, trying to limit that is huge because Tennessee has gotten so large of a portion of their points this year from behind the perimeter. So I think that's a very good point. Kind of looking at the SEC tournament here, as we're talking, another game just went final. It's been pretty chalk so far, but then there was an interesting result, even though it was chalk, I guess, technically, on, I guess, earlier today on Thursday. But you had no surprise, Vandy crushing Georgia. Georgia didn't look like they want to be there. Tom Crean's no longer going to be the head coach, which is not a shocker. Missouri beating Ole Miss, which that one didn't surprise me, but it wasn't. I don't know. I guess I thought Ole Miss would win that one, but they didn't. So whatever. 72-60. Today you had 2 bubble teams, and Texas A&M and Florida play each other, and Florida could not get their stuff together and ended up losing that one 83-80. I don't think Florida makes the NCAA tournament because of that, and I think Mike White is in trouble because of that. But Texas A&M moves on. Buzz Williams is maybe playing himself, playing his team maybe into the NCAA tournament. We'll see. I don't think they make it. What was that?
Did you see that game?
I did not. I was
okay,
working during it.
So I had a chance to see it, and I saw one highlight where a Texas A&M kid dunked on a Florida kid. I think it was
I saw that. Yeah.
Game. So I kind of tuned away, and then A&M fell apart.
Yep.
And the game goes to overtime, and I'm watching, like it was like the kid for A&M hits a shot, like it goes in the net at 1.0 seconds on the clock. It doesn't go through the net till there's like 0.4 seconds. It rattled in, and so the rule is the clock will stop when the ball goes through the net. So it actually cost Florida that the ball didn't just go straight in, it actually rattled in. And so Florida had to go full into the court in 0.4 of a second. They couldn't, they lose. So it was just one of those kind of crazy games. But it was weird. But then, I think some Florida guys 3 Florida guys fouled out. Yeah, it was a great game, and I mean, I don't know if it's a great game, but it was certainly an interesting game. It was way better than that Georgia debacle I watched a few minutes of last night. But it's like what? Let me ask you this, man. Like
Yeah.
we could easily get LSU. We could easily get LSU in this Final Four again. Like if LSU has Pinson, he can beat Arkansas. And I mean, like I think some of the issues with LSU were when Pinson was out.
Yeah.
That's kind of where they kind of like the things kind of fell apart right then. Like so, for you, I mean, obviously you're expecting Kentucky, but I guess do we know how good this LSU team is?
No. they've been, I think it's almost a tie between them and Alabama for me, but who's been kind of the most disappointing SEC team. I would put Alabama up there just because, I mean, what they did last year. And it kind of, I mean, they did lose, some key guys, but it seems like some of the guys that came back for them this year, like played worse than they did last year. So I bet you look at LSU, even you could make an argument because they have the best, they had the sixth man of the year and one of the best scorers in the SEC and Tari Eason. But you also mentioned like the fact that, they haven't had a healthy Xavier Pinson a lot of times. They've dealt with injuries. So that's why I'm cutting them a little more slack, but I don't think we know who the real LSU is. And now with them, they have Pinson. He played 32 minutes against Missouri. And that game finished with a 76-68 win. It wasn't that close. It ended up being an 8-point game. LSU was running away with it late, and Missouri scored some garbage time points, but it was all LSU for a lot of that game. But yeah, Easton finished with his 19 points. He typically gets 15 plus in a game. 19 points, 5 boards. He was only 1 of 4 from 3, but 4 or 5 from the free throw line. Days had 16 and 7. Again, you had Pinson who had 11 and 5 assists. So they didn't shoot great from 3, but they shot really well from the free throw line, and they were good, inside the 3-point arc as well. They were 5 of 19 from 3, but they still finished the game shooting 56% as a team. So that tells you right there that they were really, really good inside the perimeter, where they weren't having to shoot threes. They were actually, doing really good in the paint in that game. I didn't get to watch a minute of this game, but the stats right there just tell you all you need to know, that they weren't hitting threes, but they still shot 56% and put up 76 points, only making 5 threes. So they did a good job where, down low. They could beat Arkansas. And I think that also brings you to the point too, Gene, that this SEC tournament's going to be interesting. We talked about it last week too, about I don't know what the crowds are going to be like. I think there'll obviously be more crowds when you get to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because it's weekend, and also that's when the premier top 4 teams are playing. There's not going to be a home court advantage. There's not going to be, this is the great equalizer, as I've been calling it here for the past, I guess, couple weeks now, of playing in this SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament. Is you're not going to have a home court advantage. You're not going to have a, all the nerves maybe of being on the road and having to play in a really just loud environment. All these teams are technically playing on the road. They're all neutral site games. It's an equalizer. In fact, a lot of times if you're playing in a tournament setting and you're the favorite and you're playing the underdog and the underdog has it close, all the other neutral fans are going to start turning against you and root for the underdog. And in that case, it might turn into kind of a road-ish environment for you in these type of circumstances. So it can go from being a neutral site, kind of not really a big deal, to all of a sudden, we're in trouble. And now the other fans of other teams are rooting against us because they want to see the upset. I don't think I know who LSU is. I think I know who Arkansas is, and I trust that JD Note is a really good player, but I don't know that they're going to get, again, the type of foul calls they get in where their home arena is. I just forgot, but they're going to get the Bud Walton. They're gonna get the same calls they get in Bud Walton. You saw it in Knoxville. Like they didn't. Gabe Williams wasn't getting the charge calls he normally gets, and they don't get as many fouls on the opposing team normally. That game against Tennessee, there were fouls being called every second. It felt like that game had, I think, almost 50 fouls in 40 minutes. That was ridiculous. That officiating crew was awful. But anyway, awful for both sides. And I'm not just saying, Tennessee won, so I'm not complaining that they cost them the game, because both teams have rights to complain about what happened in that game. But I don't know, that's also a thing that could happen. What kind of officiating are we going to get in the SEC tournament? Because it hasn't been great in the SEC in the regular season this year either.
Yeah, they called like 50 fouls in the Florida A&M game. I'm not exactly sure what. And it was some of them were some of those calls where you're like, are you really going to call that? I mean, are you really going to make that call? Like a lot charged stuff. I mean, just questionable. Verticality doesn't mean anything. Like it's going to be interesting because I mean, like to your point, I mean, officiating is going to be a massive part. Tennessee's Tennessee plays physical. That was one of the things that was brought up. God, what game was that? It was, I can't remember what game it was. It was early in the season. I've got a friend that kind of talked about the officiating in a game where they weren't calling a lot on Tennessee and they were calling a lot on the other side. And it was frustrating. I don't remember what game it was. I don't remember what game it was, but you and I did a podcast not long afterwards, and I was texting him and telling him, I can't believe you did this to me. But I'm going to make a prediction. It won't be chalk in the semifinals. It won't be chalk because you've got a Bama team that would have to face. I mean, you get a Bama team who's a 6th seed who gets to face. Who would that be?
Kentucky.
Would that be?
Or no. Sorry, it would not be Kentucky. I had the bracket pulled in front of me. It's
You sure it's not Kentucky?
I think you're right. I think it's Kentucky. Let me pull it up. I'll get it
because
for you.
Tennessee plays the winner. Tennessee plays the winner of the 7-10 game, or that 7-10 bracket. Kentucky will play the winner of the 6-11. Yeah, I mean, so that would be an interesting matchup if Bama's hitting threes. Like, why wouldn't I think they have a chance there? LSU, Arkansas. I mean, what's the officiating going to be like? LSU's very, very, physical. And look, I mean, we can laugh all we want to about what I'm about to say, but I kind of feel like Will Wade is coaching for his job.
Yeah,
I do. I do. When things get, and maybe not coaching for his job is right, but I just don't know if it's going to be back next
year.
Yeah. And like you start hearing some of the stuff and questioning. So, I mean, like he's coaching his tail off right now. And look, say what they want. Been around the guy, covered him for a year, talked to him, used to talk to him some. He's a really good coach. Take out all the other stuff. In terms of like what you're doing for 40 minutes in a game, he's a really good coach. And so, you put him in a situation where, look, the only difference between him and Arkansas in Tampa is he has to wear those purple jerseys as opposed to the white ones. That's it, because it's a neutral site game. So you lose any caked in, built-in advantage that you have. So, I mean, like, I just don't think – I don't know who it's going to be. Could Auburn? Auburn's kind of trendy. Auburn's one of those teams. I mean, A&M could come out and play some defense and give them a scare.
Oh, man, if A&M beats Auburn, that'd be incredible.
And plus, look, A&M's playing for something. Auburn's playing for what, seed?
Mm-hmm.
Auburn's playing for seed. A&M, plus, like, look, it's one thing that I always talk about in these settings. Like, having the buys matters, but getting punched in the mouth a day earlier, that can be an advantage as well. Like, you get the extra days of rest because of your body of work over an 18-game regular SEC season. But that team that you're playing, look, I don't think A&M's that great, but I also think that there's something to be said for, should South Carolina win tonight, LSU winning, A&M winning, Bama winning. There's something to be said for those teams getting that one game under their belt, and therefore they're playing a lot looser because they had their first game. These 4 teams, Arkansas, Tennessee, Auburn, and Kentucky, they haven't had it. They haven't had that first game yet. They're not used to this atmosphere. That can be great because you have the extra days of rest. That could also serve to your detriment because that other team is playing for a whole heck of a lot more than you. I don't think Tennessee falls with the loss. I think they can improve with the win.
Mm-hmm.
But that thirst, that hunger isn't quite there as a team like South Carolina, who, could end up having one of these sort of crazy runs to the championship game, and it could maybe springboard their way into a tournament they weren't expected to be in. You never know. And so that's why I just think that there's there's something to be said for that, and it's why I think that one of these top 4 seeds will disappoint us and not be playing Saturday. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I just, because I think we all want to see Auburn, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, but I feel like somebody's going to spoil that for us, and then we're all going to be disappointed. We'll still watch, but we'll be a little bit disappointed.
You make a good point, because I'm looking back. Last year it was chalk. Like last year, you had the semifinals be the 1-4 and 2-3. But other than that, I'm back in 2016, and every other year aside from last year, obviously 2020 didn't happen because it got canceled. But from 19, 18, 17, and now I'm looking at 16, you had some sort of upset. Like you had either the 1 seed get losing the quarterfinals, or you had a couple of the top 4 seeds go down in the quarters. So you've had a lot of years where I'm looking at the semis, and it's not been all chalk, where you've had one of the 4 seeds go down again, other than last year where you had all chalk in there. Heck, look at even back in 2015, you had 1 advance, you had 2 and 3 advance, but then you had number 13 Auburn go on a random run and get to the semifinals against Kentucky that year. That was a Kentucky team that finished the regular season undefeated, I think. They finished. That was the year they finished undefeated in the regular season. But like, I'm gonna go back to 2014, and if it's not chalk, then okay, that was, so you have 2014. It's funny. 2014 and last year are the only years in the last basically almost decade. I guess since the expansion for the most part, where you've had all chalk in the going to the semis. That year you had Florida number 1, Tennessee number 4, Kentucky number 2, and Georgia number 3, which that is weird to think about. But you're right, like it actually doesn't happen that often, and I kind of thought there would be a little more frequent than that, but only 2 times in the last, I guess, 8 years or so, if I did the math right on that. Of course, obviously, again, one of those years there wasn't a tournament, but that's a really good point. And I think the most likely one would be, an LSU beating an Arkansas. But I genuinely, I'm not just saying this because I'm a Tennessee fan. I genuinely don't think Mississippi State or South Carolina is going to beat Tennessee. Like, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think either of those 2 teams match up particularly great against Tennessee right now. I was worried. I remember being worried about the Mississippi State game when it happened, because that was the game after Tennessee lost Camwa, and he's going to be out for likely for the season. And State has some pretty good post players, but that was, Tennessee did really well against those post players. When they didn't have their post players playing at a really good clip in that game. That was, I'll go back to the box score in that one, but I, to my knowledge, I didn't have a whole lot of high expectations for Fulkerson or Roche or Huntley Hatfield or Adu in that game. And in that game, they really didn't do a whole lot. You had Fulkerson play 22 minutes, 4 points, 3 boards. So not a whole lot, 2 fouls. Huntley Hatfield, 4 points, nothing else. Urosh, 4 points, 4 boards, 4 fouls. Adu played 12 minutes, had 2 points and 4 rebounds, which, not bad in 12 minutes. But again, like, Tennessee's post didn't do a whole lot in that game, and they still won by 9, and they won going away. It was tied at halftime, or almost. Tennessee had a 2-point lead at halftime, excuse me, and they were able to pull ahead more in the second half. And that was a game where Josiah had 18, Kennedy had 18, Vescovy had 11, Zakai had 11. That was a game where you finished with only 10 turnovers in that game and had 14 assists. So, and you were 8 of 19 from 3 in that game, actually, and 8 of 9 from the free throw line. So I genuinely don't think Tennessee's going to lose either of those 2 games. But the other games, I think you make a compelling point. If Alabama is hitting their threes, they're dangerous, and they're a team that can beat anyone if they're hitting their threes. But they haven't been a team that's been shooting a lot of threes this year, and haven't been a team that's been making a lot of threes this year compared to last year, especially. I still just think Kentucky wins that one. I think the bottom 2, the 2 and 3 seeds actually have higher percentage chances of winning their games than I think the 1 and 4 do, because Auburn's they've not been playing their best ball lately. They're still a good team. Don't get me wrong. I still think they'll make it to the title game. But like you said, A&M's playing for something. If they beat Auburn, that I think gets them into the tournament. Like, this is their teams, like the third round, it's Tennessee's Super Bowl a lot this year. For some reason, there are like 3 or 4 fan bases that did that this year. This legitimately is Texas A&M's Super Bowl for this year, at least to this point. This is the biggest game of their entire season right now, not just because it's the next game and because it's in the tournament, in the SEC tournament, but because a win here for the Aggies, that should punch their ticket to the NCAA tournament, because that get them to 22-11 on the year. And I don't think they've had a whole lot of other super high quality wins, but they've not, that would be obviously a statement win. That's a win over a top 5 team in the country. That's a win over the number one, the team that just won your league in the regular season. So you make a compelling point for there. I still would think Auburn wins, but I think A&M has a better chance of winning than either State or Carolina does against Tennessee, or Vandy, which it won't be Vandy. Alabama does against Kentucky. But then LSU Arkansas is almost a toss-up to me at this point. You've kind of convinced me with Pinson being healthy. LSU's playing better. But again, what LSU shows up, again, with the officiating, what do we get in that game for that? I don't know. It's interesting, Gene. I am very excited for when you and I get to talk next week, hopefully early next week. I think we're hopefully planning to do it early next week and talk about the actual NCAA tournament and where Tennessee is seated, who they, their bracket and everything, and looking at that, because, that's going to be exciting. I think this year, as long as they get a somewhat favorable bracket, Tennessee, again, we talked about it, has a chance to beat, if they're on and they're, as you said, finding other ways to score than just threes, they are Final Four good. I'm not expecting a Final Four run. Don't get me wrong. I'm not even expecting really an Elite Eight run, but this team's good enough regardless to get to a Sweet 16. They're good enough to win 2 games in the NCAA tournament. I genuinely think they are. But can they go there and win 3? Can they go there and win 4? I don't know. I don't trust them to win 3 games in the SEC tournament. That's different. I don't think Tennessee's going to face. They're not going to face the caliber of a Kentucky in the in their second game in the NCAA tournament. Probably not in the third game either. So I don't think you have to worry about that as much in this circumstance. But I'm excited, Gene. Like I genuinely am excited for March. Like I'm not expecting to have, I'm not getting my hopes up too high, but I'm very anticipating what this team can do and trying to see, can this finally be the team that really kind of knocks off the regular season Rick moniker for Rick Barnes, because and we've talked about it before in this podcast, he has earned that. Like that's I think a fair-ish, title to give him because of some of the ways that his teams have not performed in the NCAA tournament. We've also that both have gone deeper and looked at some of those runs that ended, a little short, and looked at some of the opponents they played, and you're like, okay, I kind of understand that. You look at the Purdue team Tennessee lost to a couple years ago. You look at some of the teams that his Texas teams lost to, that were supposed to go, deeper in the tournament. So, we try not to be like, I personally try not to be like too super homer on different things, but I also try not to like be a quote unquote negaval and stuff either. I like to give a fair and balanced approach to it. And I think a fair and balanced approach to this year's team is they're more than capable of getting to the Elite Eight and giving that team a run for their money, but they're also more than capable of losing the first weekend. So it's really going to depend on what that matchup looks like. And that's why I'm very excited for next week when we get to talk about that.
Yeah. And, I hate that college basketball has just become a sport where we only judge what you do from March 1st until the end of your season. Because I don't feel like it's always been that way. I think because of television networks and the such and all that, it's like sports is basically now March Madness. College football is college football playoff. NBA is YouTube, highlights, Twitter, Instagram, engagement, superstars. NFL is obviously it's the best run brand. Even though they misstep, but they're just too big to fail. So like, I hate that that's what it's become, but that's essentially in college basketball what it is. How good are you in March? Are you the 28-5? I think is what Tennessee was that year. They made in 2019 going into the tournament, or 29-5 because they won 2 games and then got beaten. I think they were 31-6. So which team are you? So you're telling me that you're telling me that Tennessee was struggled to play. If they're not an 18-0 type of conference team, then you can't be surprised. Like Tennessee lost 3 games in conference play that year, which means that they would lose. They could potentially lose a game to Purdue in stupid fashion. Like it's a horrible measurement that we always try to judge people just off of like that moment, that one game. Rick Barnes is a stinky coach because some kid, because a kid kicks his foot out and Lamonte Turner fouls him, or because of the year before the Sister Jean game, come on, it's just I just feel like, I mean, for me, I just feel like we should be better because I just hate the fact that we're doing it, that we reduce a whole season to 3 games or to 6 games or whatever happens from March 1st. Like, again, as you mentioned, I covered UTC, who was 1 and 1A with Furman all year long. And, if UTC, if that ball is 2 inches shorter, or if it's off to the right, then UTC is now 26-8 and they're going to the NIT. But because it went in, now this Furman team who's really good doesn't make the tournament at all. And UTC is going dance. And I hate that we've willed it down to just the small things. But as far as like Barnes is concerned, this is his chance. This is yet another opportunity. You're guaranteed to be in the tournament. You've got a team that can win games in the tournament. You've built a roster that has just progressively gotten better throughout the course of the season, even as adversity has hit so many times with COVID before the Bama game, the Olivier injury, the Josiah concussion, like all the different things that have kind of hit you along the way. You've been able to make it through each and every one of those things. You've made it to where you're now in a good position to be at your best going into the NCAA tournament. That's why sometimes the urgency isn't there for this tournament, for the SEC tournament, because your whole focus is, can we figure out how to win 6 games over the next 3 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
And so that can lead to some people who, you're playing a team that's maybe playing with this, with this hair on fire, whereas you may not be because you've done the work for 30 something games, and that could cost you. But I do think this is a team that can win. When you look at what they've got, we talked about what they've got. They have a roster that's capable of winning now. Like, again, I question their ability to score outside of hitting threes, but they've put themselves in a position with the roster they've had. Like, over 20 times this year, they figured out how to win games. So they're a good team. Whole heck of a lot more times they figured out how to lose games.
Yep.
And so, like, for me, I'm watching a team that is capable of winning games when it counts, per se. So I think, I'm not like as excited as you, because I'm not just approaching this from a more journalistic standpoint. I'm just wanting to watch them and see what they do. But I'm intrigued to see what they do over the next 3 weeks. And, I'm really excited to sit there and talk about, Monday, I think we decided to do the podcast. We would have done it Sunday, but I've got some NCAA stuff to do with UTC. Just so every other listeners know, we would love to do like an instant reaction thing, but I've got some other instant reactions I've got to deal with as well. But yeah, sitting down Monday, we would have had 24 hours to kind of analyze all this stuff and come up with some opinions as to the draw. What's the biggest, where are the issues at? So I'm excited to sit there and look at it myself and see exactly what they could do, because this is a team that can win. And if they have the proper draw, they're going to win. And as simple as that to me.
I would agree with you. And yeah, I'm going to try to do some stuff for the SEC tournament, but I'm going to be out of town this weekend too. So I'll be watching the games, but I don't know that I'll have all my entire setup like I usually do for videos and stuff. So I'll try to do some stuff, guys. As a heads up for listening to the podcast or watching YouTube, I'll try to do some things for the SEC tournament, but I can't guarantee it'll happen. We'll see. But yeah, I personally might try to do some live reaction also on Sunday, but that might be like a Twitter space or something like that, where it's kind of an audio format rather than video. So we'll see about that. But Gene, I think that'll be a good place to end this podcast here. I again am very excited. I think this has been, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, a regular season that not just met my expectations, but exceeded them. And I think this team, like you just said, it is in a good spot. And I think they are, with the right draw, and not only just in a good spot, but in a spot to do some things that Tennessee doesn't normally do in postseason play, and maybe make a run that they haven't done, but maybe one time ever, and maybe even further. We'll see. I'm not trying to get my hopes up too high, but I think this team's a good team. And I think, we've seen some things from this team that make you also, excited for next year's team and what they can be next year too. So again, thank you all for tuning in. And as we're going, about to close out here, it looks like about to be final that Tom Crean is not going to be back at Georgia. So I can't say I'm shocked there. There's a lot of talk about it. It looks like the two have agreed to part ways. So just stunned. But anyway, this has been Vol Basketball Fever.
Before we finish, What would have happened if Tom Crean had said, "No, I'm not leaving"? Like, I love how they put agreed to part ways. They basically said, "Look, we're done with you," and he was like, "Okay, just let me get my money." So therefore, they technically agreed to part ways. But there was no way they're about to bring this guy back after 6-26. No. I just love this. I'm sorry. As we close this thing down, it's just one of those things I just kind of laugh at because it's kind of ridiculous to say, "Man, yeah, we're going to part ways with you," as if he had a choice in the matter.
Yeah, you're like, what if he held him hostage? What if he's like, "I'm not leaving. You gotta fire me."
Yeah. Just wait. I'll give you 5 wins. I'll give you 5-27 next year. Test me. Give me a chance. I'll go 4-28 and it'll be my business. All right, I've done enough.
Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and end the podcast here. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We would definitely appreciate that. We'll read them off at the top of the show as well. Again, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. We really appreciate all of you who've helped make this year fantastic. I'm looking forward to some postseason talk, our first postseason talk, I guess the postseason era of Vol basketball fever. Very much looking forward to it. But I'm Nathanael, signing off for Gene. This has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.